Tried to do a video a few minutes ago and it didn't work. So I'm trying to do it from my phone. Um, you see how bright my phone is? That's because they screwed up. I had to get my screen replaced and it's placed over the camera. It's like a permanent light leak in the video. Cool. How cool is that? Um, try and balance this out. Hold on a second. That's better, maybe? Maybe? Maybe not. Um, yeah, so somebody sent me an article. It's not an article, it's a scripture. It's from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavata Purana, Canto 11. It's like the 11th, 15th chapter. Lord Kṛṣṇa, description of the mystical yoga perfections. Now, I've been having some experiences like with meditation, and my friend Nathan sent me this scripture this morning, and it just happens to coincide with a lot of stuff that I'm doing. Um, so that's good. It's a bit lengthy. It's not that lengthy. I mean, it's readable. I'm thinking I may read it, some of it. What it's about is this chapter describes the eighth primary and 10 minor mystical perfections. So there's 18 mystical perfections. They're devoted by fixing one's mind in yoga, but they are ultimately obstructions to achieving the spiritual abode of Lord Vishnu. By questioning the Udava, Lord Sri Krishna describes the characteristics of the 18 mystical perfections and the particular kind of meditation by which each is achieved. In conclusion, Krishna states that for one who desires to perform pure devotion, wow, I'm having a mystical experience. In conclusion, Krishna states that for one who desires to perform pure devotional service to the personality of Godhead, the achievement of these mystic perfections is a waste of time because they distract one from proper worship. All these perfections are automatically offered to a pure devotee, but he does not accept them. Unless used in the yoga of devotional service, these perfections are valueless. A devotee simply sees that the personality of Godhead is always present everywhere, both externally and internally, and depends completely on him. Um, so they go through some of the deets here. Some of the deets. Um, I'm just trying to see if I can see chats. If any chats comes out, okay. So I'm skipping some of the deets, and I'm just going to go through. There's a bunch of them, but I'm not going to talk about the specific types of mystical perfection. Um, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, this is kind of what I want to talk about. Um, First of all, I'm going to start on this is like later on. They've already gone through a few of the perfections. Um, yeah, I'm just going to read this part. Among the eight primary mystical perfections, the three by which one transforms one's own body are anima, becoming smaller than the smallest, mahima, becoming greater than the greatest, and lagima, becoming lighter than the lightest. Through the perfection of prapti, one acquires whatever one desires, and through prakama one experiences any enjoyable object, either in this world or the next. Through asita siddhi, one can manipulate the sub-potencies of Maya, and through the controlling potency called vasita siddhi, one is unimpeded by the three modes of nature. One who has acquired kama vasaita siddhi can obtain anything from anywhere to the highest possible limit. So it doesn't really describe like how to attain these or what they are. It just says if you attain it, you achieve this. So a little later on here, it starts getting more into how things are attained. And it starts getting a bit more interesting about what I'm interested in, I guess. The 10 secondary mystical perfections arising from the modes of nature are the powers of freeing oneself from hunger and thirst and other bodily disturbances, moving bodily disturbances, hearing and seeing things far away, moving the body at the speed of the mind, assuming any form one desires, entering the bodies of others, dying when one desires, witnessing the pastimes between the demigods and the celestial girls called the apsaras, completely executing one's determination and giving orders whose fulfillment is unimpeded. Okay. One who worships me in my atomic form, pervading all subtle elements, fixing his mind on that alone, obtains the mystical perfection called anima. So this is going back to that first thing I just mentioned. So, so what he's saying here, Kṛṣṇa, is that if you fix your mind on Kṛṣṇa alone, you will achieve the mystical perfection called anima. One who observes his mind in the particular form of the Mahat Tattva and thus meditates upon me as the supreme soul of the total material existence achieves the mystical perfection called Mahima. By further observing the mind in the situation of each element, such as the sky, air, fire, and so on, one progressively acquires the greatness of each material element. I exist within everything, says Kṛṣṇa, and I am therefore the essence of the atomic constituents of material elements. By attaching his mind to me in this form, the yogi may achieve the perfection called lagima, by which he realizes the subatomic substance of time. Fixing his mind completely in me, within the element of false ego generated from the mode of goodness, the yogi obtains the power of mystic acquisition, by which he becomes a proprietor of the senses of all living entities. He obtains such perfection because his mind is absorbed in me. One who concentrates all mental activities in me as the super soul of that phase of the Mahat Tattva, which manifests the chain of fruitive activities, obtains from me, whose appearance is beyond material perception, the most excellent mystical perfection called prakamya. I'm going to cut to the chase here. I'll just finish this part. One who places his consciousness on Vishnu, the super soul, the prime mover and supreme lord of the external energies consisting of the three modes, obtains the mystic perfection of controlling the other conditioned souls, their material bodies, and their bodily designations. So I guess where I'm going with this is to say that what this document, this scripture, seems to be saying, this is chapter 15 of the Bhagavata Purana, Lord Krishna's description of the mystical yoga perfections. What it seems to be pointing out is that placing your consciousness in specific places makes you achieve siddhis, which are also known as like magical powers, right? So in this case, some of these magical powers are becoming aware of the subtle atomic substance of time, becoming aware of the senses of all living entities. There's a whole bunch of them. I've only read a couple of these things. There's 18 of them, but there's a whole bunch of these sort of magical siddhis which you can achieve. And those are achieved by placing your consciousness in certain places. So this is interesting because how do you place your consciousness in certain places? How is that done? And how would you become aware? How would you become aware of where your consciousness is right now? And is it important? Clearly, it might be important. I mean, this text is suggesting that if you place your consciousness in specific places, certain mystical states or enlightenment states can be achieved simply by focusing your awareness into certain aspects of divinity. So that's an interesting thing too. I mean, there's aspects of divinity now which we can place our consciousness on, or even just becoming aware that divinity exists, which most people don't believe, right? Most people are atheists and don't believe that divinity exists, which is completely understandable because our whole society is structured to tell us that divinity doesn't exist. And it's just so ironic. But how do we discover where our consciousness actually is now? Because before you can go and place your consciousness in the super soul of where Kṛṣṇa is, I mean, or placing your consciousness in the super soul of Vishnu, or in the mind form of Narayana, or in his manifestation as the impersonal Brahman, or as the upholder of the religious principles and the personification of purity, or is the purified sound vibration. And it goes on and on and on and on. But the problem is like before you can do that, you have to sort of focus you have to sort of learn where your consciousness is now, because you can't move it anywhere unless you know where it's located at this moment. And you see, that's the trick. And this is something. This is really, it's really interesting and fascinating. One of the best ways, which I always talk about, and I'm going to talk about again because it's funny because like I tend to talk about the same things over and over again, but it's like it's kind of like meditation. Like meditation, I tend to do the same thing over and over again. But what happens is every time you do it, new things are revealed. So it seems like it's useful. Now, one of the best ways of learning how this works is a technique of yoga called Nidra Yoga. Excuse me, I'm just looking. There's a really good YouTube channel which has excellent Nidra Yoga videos. Nidra Yoga. I'm just trying to find it really quickly so I can recommend it. I've recommended it before, but it's so good. Clearly, I'm on my computer right here. I've got this balanced. The channel is called Ali Boothroyd, ALLY space BOOTHROYD. Sarovara Yoga. She's got really excellent Nidra Yoga videos. And so what Nidra Yoga basically is, and this is a practice which I think was developed from the Divine Life Society by, this is where I first saw it, was on the website, Divine Life Society, from Swami, what's his name? Sivananda. I think it was his disciple, Saraswati, who did it, who came up with this. And what it is basically, they sell it as a sort. They don't sell it. Well, they promote it as a type of yoga, which basically you just do lying down on your back, and you do it like almost like on the verge of sleep. So it's not like a physical yoga; it's like a conscious yoga. And so what you do is you might start off and you're thinking about your fingers, and then your hand, and then the back of your hand, and then your wrist, and then your forearm. Which is, I promote this all the time. This kind of style of meditation. So this is Yoga Nidra. And the way Yoga Nidra works is you move your consciousness around your body, but then at certain points, like maybe you're saying, okay, my knuckle, my other knuckle, the root of my finger, the bone, the skin of my hand, the blood inside of my hand, and you allow your mind just to think about these different aspects of physical reality, right? And you're just thinking about these things. Now, why are you doing this? One of the reasons you're doing this is because it allows you it's sort of like a way of attuning. It's like an attunement of your mind to think about something which exists right now. So what's cool about this is you're thinking about something which is physically here right now. You're not thinking about your girlfriend. You're not thinking about work tomorrow. You're not wondering why you spent all your money on whiskey. Any of these problems, you're just thinking about something which is here right now. And this turns out to be a really important practice. Possibly the most important practice is just figuring out what is here right now. And so this is a great way of doing it. So you just think about these things, these objects. Now, the way to do it in Nidra Yoga is as you're moving around, they'll sometimes switch it up a little bit. So you're thinking about these physical objects. And the way they do it in the Divine Life Society books is when you get like to the wrist or to the elbow, let's say. Then what you'll do is you'll do a visualization. So you're thinking about these things, then you're like, okay, visualize a lotus on a calm water with the lotus flower just opening up. As you look at it, it's opening up at this moment. And this is very perfect, beautiful imagery. And then you go back to the body. Okay, you're thinking about the bicep, maybe, or the tricep. Maybe you're thinking about like the blood system that flows inside the body. Now, most of the Nidra Yoga stuff doesn't penetrate into the body so much as I've seen, but I kind of sort of hybridize it up a little bit. So if you look at some of the Taoist practices of Mantak Chia, they go deeply into the body. So a lot of what they do is they'll start off with the skin, and then they go to the muscles, then into the blood, then into the marrow. And there's like a pathway of the like most of the Taoist stuff is based on the idea of like of semen retention or like sexual energy retention, right? And the idea is the sexual energy gets compressed into the bone marrow. And so what you do is you will you will allow your consciousness to focus through the different structure of the body into the bone marrow, into like the center of the bone, which becomes really interesting when you start thinking about the spine and the central channel. And if you're penetrating into the bone marrow and maybe visualizing that marrow as energy, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. All you're really doing right now is you're just moving your consciousness around your body. You're moving your consciousness. So if we go back to the thing here from Kṛṣṇa about the from the Bhagavata Purana, Lord Krishna's description of the most mystical yoga perfections, he is saying, let's move our consciousness into specific places of divinity, and if you do this, you will achieve certain cities, right? So one way to learn how to move your consciousness is like doing this Nidra Yoga practice. Now, what's really interesting about this is if you look through a lot of other books and disciplines, this practice of moving consciousness around your body is very common. Is very common. If you look at some of all the magical books talk about doing this, right? But even the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. I mean, what you're actually doing, you're actually moving. You're allowing your consciousness to move into those places at those specific moments, right? And this idea of moving consciousness and where is consciousness located, and what happens is like I think what happens is like the calibration of your awareness of consciousness is may not be very attuned. And so how do you fine tune your awareness of consciousness so that it's really like precise? And practice, I guess, right? So practice is one way of doing it. So if you're doing like things like Nidra Yoga, you can move your consciousness around. Now, there's different forms of this. Like I know Israel Regardie, who didn't do, it's a magician. His way of doing this was thinking about the hand and then relaxing. Imagine all the muscles relaxing, then moving to the forearm and relaxing and relaxing. And so you go through a process of relaxation. And he's got a book which is called Relaxation Prayer and something else. So he actually combines this process of relaxation and moving consciousness around with prayer, right? With prayer. Now, I think I'm over, like I know in the past I've said, I get a little embarrassed about using the word God or prayer, but I think I'm over that because it's so obvious that it's real, that it's like, why would I be embarrassed by that, But what happens is like, what I'm saying is like most people, their consciousness is so unattuned that they can't recognize the structure. Dude, who can recognize this stuff? The only reason I can recognize it is because I've done lots of meditation and I did crap loads of ayahuasca, I guess, right? But but being able to, the more you start moving your consciousness around, the more probable it is that you're going to start recognizing the space in which it's moving, right? Because there's like a structure, like just by default, if you're thinking about different things, I mean, you could probably chart out on a piece of paper. Like if I'm thinking about my hand and then I'm thinking about my foot, if you were on a piece of paper and you had to put a dot for each of those thoughts, they're probably not going to be in the same space, right? They're probably going to be separated by a bit of space. And that space, what you would do is if you were doing that on a piece of paper, you're actually mapping the space of consciousness onto a two-dimensional plane with a pencil and a paper. But that's not actually what's happening. If you're actually to stay alert to what's actually happening in your mind, you'd realize that the space, the placement of consciousness is actually, it's not two-dimensional. There's something else going on. And the more you do this, the more the underlying structure, and I hesitate to call it a structure because it's an invisible fluid, pliable material which is formed and manipulated by intention. So as you do this, moving around, this becomes really an interesting way to help you map out where your consciousness is. And the interesting thing about the yoga nidra practices is like I was saying, they move into these visualizations. So some of them are naturalistic visualizations. Like you might imagine, and they're interesting too, the way they do it in yoga nidra. So you might imagine a full moon over a mountain, or they're like the way the visualizations they're doing are actually metaphorical, right? They're metaphorical visualizations. You might imagine the steeple of a church or whatever it might be. And so what they do is they provoke placing your consciousness in a place other than the physical body. So what that does is, like, if I was mapping out points in a two-dimensional plane, like, okay, here's my hand, here's my leg, here's my tummy. Okay, the lotus in the Buddha's mind emerging from his crown chakra. Oh, well, it's not in the paper. Maybe it's up here somewhere. So I think what happens is those visualizations force a dimensional shift. Like literally, it's like literally a dimensional shift from two-dimensional, in this case, to three-dimensional. But in the space of consciousness, it's actually doing something different. Now, at first, that seems to be represented by just some imaginative imagery. But the imaginative imagery is actually a pointer for something that actually exists, right? So, for example, if I say cup of coffee, that's an imaginative pointer for something which actually exists. If I say the lotus of the crown of the Buddha, that's a pointer to something which actually exists. Or does it? We don't know. But what happens is it creates a trajectory, it creates a vector, it creates a vector of velocity which pushes consciousness into a specific trajectory. I'm going to use trajectory again. Trajectory towards that idea. It points towards something which maybe we're not able to be aware of yet, but the idea pushes us towards this. So the movement of consciousness. And how is the movement of consciousness facilitated? Now, obviously, advertising people use this all the time, right? They use this all the time. If you want to sell a sickly, sugary drink, like Coca-Cola with lots of caffeine, you certainly are not going to have a cup of Coca-Cola, right? You will have a picture of a girl in a bikini, right? And I mean, it just becomes really interesting. Where does your consciousness go to? Does your consciousness go to the sugary brown drink, or does it go to the girl in the bikini? Now, what happens is there's like a freak. What's it called? A pattern interrupt. They're playing with pattern interrupts. So they've got one idea, crappy sugary drink. We all love it. I love Coca-Cola. I wonder if I like Coca-Cola or if I just like the girl in the bikini, and I've associated it because these thousands of pattern interrupts, right? Same thing with beer. Beer is even worse. You think, you know what? I will have a beer. And you think this is really great. But you're actually sitting alone drinking beer. The bikini girl didn't show up. But now it doesn't matter, right? You've already got the drink. But it's the placement of consciousness. And what's happening in those cases is you're allowing your consciousness to be placed for you. So there's lots of people in this world who want you to give them the privilege of positioning your consciousness for you. And you, if you're not aware that people can place your consciousness for you by proxy, simply because you've delegated the responsibility or weren't aware that it was placeable, then they're going to do it, right? They're going to place your consciousness where it serves them best. There's lots of modern examples of this. And of course, the way you can facilitate the movement of consciousness is not just with sex, you can do it with fear, right? That's the modern way to position consciousness is through fear constructs, right? Um, it's astonishing in its power. It's absolutely astonishing. And the problem is like something like fear or sex. I mean, those are obvious things, right? Those are like obvious ways. But I guess what I'm going to try and point out to you is that the fine-tunement of the placement of consciousness, the fine-tunement. For example, there's some people who are really picky about stuff, right? Some people are really picky, right? They might, they might like something very specific or dislike something very specific, right? Like, so for example, I get this old sweater on here. I love this sweater. It's really old, but I left it out in the sun too long. And in the back, it's actually kind of bleached out here in the back. I don't care. I love this sweater, right? Sweatshirt, whatever the hell it is, right? But some people might find that really annoying because it's not fresh and new, right? And so what might happen is their mind will get caught up in this little detail. They might find it really annoying, right? That little detail, and you can't get out of your mind. It's like something, or if somebody says something, you might be at a party or something, and then somebody says one off-color thing, and you can't get your mind off of it, right? And it makes you like that. It becomes what it is. It's like an energy structure. That little idea. So it might become, it's like an energy structure in consciousness. So what happens is this bleached out sweater, for somebody else, that creates some kind of like energetic trigger. Maybe they're a perfectionist. And they're like, well, why would you do that? And then it's like it ties in with whatever their karmic stuff is, and they get this little sort of energetic knot, and their mind starts winding around. This might annoy them, right? Or it happens in conversations, like I was saying. You might be with somebody. This happened to me when I was in my 20s. Me and my buddy were out with somebody, and just as they were dropping us off in the car, one of the guys, I can't remember what he said, but it was really insulting. It was subtle, but it was like insulting, and I never forgot it. And I got him back. I was like, complete vengeance is going to be carried out from this. There's nobody's ever going to insult me like this, and so I wreaked havoc. But it was just like it was just a word. It was just a word. But what happens is these focuses of consciousness, right? But they can get really fine-tuned. Am I going to talk about that? Maybe not. But there's lots of like very fine-tuned things, like beautiful girl. You might like her hair, or you might like her eyelashes, right? Or whatever detail, right? But you can like focus in on certain details. It's interesting actually if you think of it, especially with something as popular as sexuality. I mean, there are specific details about people, which it varies from person to person, but people have specific things which attract them physically, right? It might be a curvature. It might be the specific shape, right? This is why you hear people talking about a pear-shaped butt, right? Or what do they talk about in TikTok? Pretty face, small waist, and a big base, right? I've seen it. They're talking about specific curvature orientations, which are highly not just desired, but people are placing their consciousness in a structure of awareness. Because that's what it is. Ultimately, it's a structure of awareness. It's an awareness of a specific form sequence of a pretty face, small waist, and a big base in that case. Oh, another rhyme, right? And so it's like you've got, I mean, it's crazy. But people don't actually realize it, because what happens is there's like parallel with the actual physical form that's being described. So in that case, we're actually talking about three distinct things, which might be interpreted this differently for each person, but small, pretty face, I mean, that would just be like some idealized face. Small waist would be like this, probably. Big base. So it's like the classic curvature of the archetypal sexual woman, right? But every time the consciousness focuses on a specific structure like that, there's more information. There's metadata, right? There's like metadata moving along with that information at the same time. Now, probably you all know what metadata is. That's like if you see an image on the internet, you can download it, look at its metadata. You can often tell what camera it was filmed from, what date it was filmed on, all kinds of stuff, right? You can tell lots of stuff. But if you don't know that it exists, all you think is, well, it's just a nice image. But there's other data. And even these archetypal focuses of thoughts have metadata. And the metadata is, I don't even want to call it metadata, because in the context of like a computer image, the metadata is usually like sparse. There's not a lot of information. But in the context of consciousness, the metadata is actually like more significant than the point of focus. So before you can even get to placing your consciousness on Krishna or Vishnu and achieving some of these cities, you've kind of got to place your consciousness on yourself, and also allow your awareness to expand enough that you can see this layer of metadata at the same time, to see what else is there. Like what is actually being evoked at the same time? Because all ideas have are formed from the ether, right? It's something that people might say, all ideas are formed from the ether, but what is the ether? That is what created this idea. And it's like, well, what the hell is in there, right? And why is there like this magnetic attraction to this form? Now, most of these forms, most of these points of energy, most of these locations of consciousness are structured and conditioned by the prism of sensual awareness. What are you talking about, Scott? What is the prism of sensual awareness? It's a prism, okay? It's a prism. It's a crystalline structure of the senses. If you were to take sight, smell, taste, sound, touch, and sexual touch, because more and more I'm thinking the sexual experience should be considered a sense, even though it's an expression of touch. It's so specific that it's almost and powerful. It really should just be considered a sense. But if you were to take all those aspects, all those senses, and if you were to view each sense as the face, I've got my tarot cards here. So let's say that this is the sense of touch, and this is the sense of taste, and this is the sense of smell, and then you've got another one. What I'm saying is, if we include the sexual organs, you end up with like a cube. You end up with a cube, right? You get 6 faces. You get 6 senses, 6 faces, and it forms a prism, a cube prism. Wow, I just made that up. I didn't actually just make this up. The cube prism I did, but this was like this was revealed to me during meditation. So these the sensory prism. Why do I call it a sensory prism? Because like each one of the senses is really they're quite unique, right? Smell is significantly different from taste, yet smell and taste are very connected, right? Like if you're tasting something, oh wow, that's really delicious. You usually are smelling it too, right? Um, and often, like if you see something, you often hear it. So I was meditating on this, and so for example, if you're a musician and you're playing guitar, you've got a touch sense, right? There's a visual sense of like looking at your fingers. You're listening at the same time, but we don't really have smell or taste here, right? But basically, three senses are being combined. And the metadata is that there's an unwritten musical thing going on here. Are you improvising? Where's that coming from? Where's the music in your head coming from? Because there's a sensory input here. There's touch, sight, and sound. But where's the information coming from? So that's the metadata. And the metadata is actually the most important thing, right? The metadata is way more important than everything else. Gordon Ramsay, the chef, right? He's annoying, but like, what's he doing? He's chopping up. He's he's chopping up the onions, right? He's chopping. Smell. The eyes, the sight. Smell, sight, touch, taste. You got to taste it. Touch, sight. What am I saying? Smell. All the senses are there. So in a way, cooking is like it's a perfect prism of sensory, almost perfect, right? If we're including one of the senses, if we're including sexuality as one of the senses, but let's not go down that path, right? Um, but these are things we don't think about. And how does ever since I did rasa, like it's like this stuff just reveals itself to me, and it's just like, and I meditate on it, and it's crazy. But like the uh, the revelation of reality through the senses. You see, without the senses, none of this exists, right? None of it. We take the senses for granted. None of this exists without senses. You'll have no sensory experience. And what's funny is like our memories and visualizations are formed. How are they formed? Through imagery. But the imagery, here's the thing, which came first? The imagination or the senses? And what is the interface between those two things? And the reason I call the senses a prism is because it's revealed that way. Because if you actually meditate on your senses, if you take the time and meditate on your sense of smell, right? It's located here. This is where your sense of smell seems to be located, right? Then the sense of taste is right here. It's like, listen, it's a prism. We just don't think about it spatially. But our whole world is constructed by like a stereoscopic projection of information coming in from here, from here, from here, from here. And this all coalesces. It's almost like a reverse prism. It's almost like all these colors are reversing into a white light, which represents awareness of this space in which the space we're occupying, right? The prism of the senses. It's very interesting. And I've spoken about this in a bunch of my videos lately, I guess, about the tattvas and the elements and stuff. And like, you can push this in lots of directions, but the first thing is getting the awareness of the location of your consciousness. And once you can successfully identify, because what you'll find is your consciousness actually moves into extremely tight places, into like places which you're like, how did I? You don't even realize what it's doing. You allow your consciousness to move into extremely tight places, right? It's crazy what we allow our consciousness to do. We, we allow our consciousness to visit places, and you know, some of the places we allow our consciousness to visit, we're embarrassed by it. Like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking about that. Why am I thinking about that? That's what am I doing? Right? What were you just thinking about? Oh, nothing. No. Never mind. Never mind. You know, I'm not going to mention that. Right? And so there's like, not only does that place not exist where you were just imagining you were, or were you there? One thing's for sure, whether you were there or not, you weren't conscious of it. You knew where your mind was, but you weren't aware of that placement as a location, right? That's interesting. I just got a message on the phone saying my bank account's been infiltrated. That's great. Um, so like what? See, my mind just went there. Wait, I'm in the bank account now. How much money is there? Do I care? Right? It's an old bank account, so it doesn't matter. Um, but like, but that's an interesting thing though. Like you get a message, boom, oh, consciousness went somewhere completely different for a second. Completely different. Okay, bring it back here. Bring it back. Let's be aware. Let's be aware of where the consciousness is placed. Where is it? Um, Look at those fabulous girls who do the Olympic gymnastics. What fabulous athletes they are, right? Amazing athletes. I love placing my consciousness in their incredible acrobatic feats, and I always allow my consciousness to contemplate their training that they've gone through, their pride and nobility as athletes, and when they win, they represent the nobility of their country. Maybe, or maybe that's not where my consciousness goes, right? So, like, what is going on? And so, what happens is the it's almost like your consciousness is like a cursor. It's almost like your consciousness is a cursor on a page, on a document, right? So maybe you've got a long document, which is the explanation of life as we know it. And your awareness at this moment is the cursor on that page. But what's happening is it's just moving around. You don't even know how, it's like you got a mouse and you're just like, oh, it's just flying around. And there's elasticity to it. It's moving, it's bouncing around because you get no idea that this is a thing. That your intention and awareness is something which is worth having control of. And what's funny is that the consciousness itself, it's so subtle because we're talking about something which is really subtle. I've watched about 20 videos on YouTube today, and I've not seen one person talk about this yet. None of them. That means nobody's aware of it. But what is going on is this, is the point, the placement of your awareness at this moment is the Big Bang. It's the Big Bang. The location of your consciousness at this moment is the point from which reality emerges. And if you meditate, doing like the Nidra Yoga idea to train your mind, or you meditate moving your awareness through the senses into the prism of sensual awareness, you and you follow the senses towards, it's like you get this reverse prism of light moving into the center point of pure awareness. What you discover is that point of pure awareness is eternal, infinite divinity. It's eternal, infinite divinity. That point of awareness. And this is the funny thing, because people don't even know. They're busy, they're so busy moving around, and they haven't realized that that is the point of eternal, infinite divinity, from which it's like a nuclear explosion, but is beyond that. Everything emerges from this perfectly. And so this is really funny because like somebody was saying to me today, they sent me a video, thanks Deborah, about the Enneagram and the Sufis and the Enneagram, and there's a whole bunch of different ways of understanding consciousness and reality, and they all seem really interesting. And I've certainly studied all these things, and it was a really interesting chat. But you know what it is? It's another intellectual construct which is flopped over, flopped over the central point of awareness. It's just more covers. It's just more, everything is being propped up. All intellectual constructs, all emotions, all ideas are all being propped up and simultaneously being propped up and hiding the center point of awareness. Which is to say, like, listen, there's value in studying all these things. There's value in talking about this work of Kṛṣṇa, which I'm reading here, or the Enneagram, in that it trains us to think about things differently. And that's probably what's most needed most of all, is to start thinking differently about things. But awareness itself, I'm just trying to connect to it right now. There's nothing to worry about. All this craziness, I'm just going to make a blanket statement here because I don't want to get any videos deleted. All the modern craziness, social, political, health related, it's all a load of horse crap. It doesn't, it's not really significant. The infinite point of awareness from which all ideas, all subjects and objects and sensory experiences and everything emerges is pure divine love, and it just doesn't matter. So what we've done there is we've traced our awareness from the fingers to the hands, to the arms, to the bones, to the gymnast, to the food, to the guitar player, and now to the infinite point of divine awareness, maybe centered somewhere at the middle point of the sensory prism. So we've drawn some kind of map of awareness. And so what Kṛṣṇa says here in this work, here's one. The purified living entity who fixes his mind on the extraordinary sound vibrations occurring within me as the personified sky and total life air is then able to perceive within the sky the speaking of all living entities. So what Kṛṣṇa seems to be saying here is that if you focus your awareness on the center point of light, but then within that light trying to perceive sound vibrations as if they're echoing through the air. You see, now we start with more of an idea. So that's where we want to locate this stuff. Maybe is like, okay, we've located where this divine awareness is emerging from. So now, can we focus our mind in the same way I was focusing my mind on the gymnast's ass, right? It wasn't her nobility. Can I use the same kind of fine tuning on this emanation? And how would you find that? How would you find the emanation of sound and light awareness within the emanation of Kṛṣṇa from pure awareness? So it means this is a great thing. I mean, you can do a lot of reading and you'll get some ideas about, okay, what's the way to do this? So the one thing I always say is, like, if you look at some of the Kabbalah stuff, with Yod He Vah He means earth, water, air, fire. So does that mean that God is literally the archetypes of earth, water, air, and fire? Or that you can find divinity in this? And is that what Kṛṣṇa is talking about here when he talks about find the sound vibrations within the total air and personified sky? So he's saying that the air is the personification of himself. That's exactly what he's saying. So if you think about the air and you try and understand it, you move your consciousness in the same way you might move it into your finger. You start looking at this center point of the sensory prism where this pure divinity emerges from, and you try and sort of, it's almost like you're trying to tease out like a strand of what he's talking about here, of this air. Now, with the elements, this can be a practice thing. You can just practice focusing your consciousness on different areas. And this is Initiation into Hermetics is a great book for learning how to do that, but there are many books which discuss this, right? But you can, there's a whole bunch of ways of doing it. You can just imagine that you are the air or the water. I've been doing water a lot lately. And it's revealed as divinity. That's all it can be. And it emerges from this point, which the point, so what is the location of the point? What is it? I'll give you a second. It's everywhere. It's wherever you place your cursor, wherever you place your awareness is where reality emerges from. That's what it is. It emerges from wherever consciousness is located, which is to say, everywhere. Simultaneously. And I'm sitting here, I'm looking out the window here, and I'm just looking up, and there's trees and there's leaves. I'm placing my consciousness in the leaves without even thinking about it. There's a curtain, there's an old door. Yeah, so I guess that's all I got to talk about. So once you know that it's worth your time to keep track of or practice locating your consciousness in specific places, then that will help you locate the what you might be looking for. Now, Some people, of course, think it doesn't matter. I mean, if it's all divinity, then, it's all cool. But I think that's kind of true too. But the awareness, it's the awareness of awareness. It's kind of, you got to be meta. You got to allow your awareness to be aware of itself. And then like secrets are revealed. Now maybe it's not important to know the secrets, but it's I find it really comforting and also like this is literally the interface into divinity. Like, and I don't know, it seems to me that like the divinity that's revealed is beyond archetypal constructs of Jesus or Kṛṣṇa even. And these are all thought forms which are pointing towards this center point of infinite emanation. And that's kind of where you want to abide with your consciousness. You want to sort of move your consciousness into that point of emanation and just stay there, because that's where everything's actually happening. And like in meditation, if you move into the space of the emanation and then you watch it and you're just sitting there and it's almost like you're bathing. It's almost like you're sunbathing in the emanation of pure divinity, just emerging infinitely. It's fucking amazing. I'm feeling it right now. It's fucking amazing. It's this emanation of divinity. It's fucking endless, and it just keeps fucking rolling over you. But then what you do is you will lose your point of awareness, and you'll start thinking about your girlfriend, or I got to pay this bill, and you're like, dude, why are you thinking about these inferior subjects, or these are objects? Just move back into the emanation point, and you move back in, and you're like, what was I wasting my time doing this for? But it seems like the infinite myriad objects which seem to construct physical reality what is going on? I mean, they're like, they receive their power from this point, but their implementation is to sort of, it hides the point. It hides the point, and it hijacks awareness into focusing, because many of those objects are beautiful, right? Some of those objects are like, oh wow, that's really beautiful. But it's like whatever. I mean, it's like whatever. If you focus on the point of emanation, and the point of emanation is beyond description. You can't talk about Jesus or Shiva or Krishna. You can, but that's not what it is. It's beyond any of those things. Those names are just like, it's just humanity trying to come to some kind of terms with this infinite emanation of pure. I mean, love's not a strong enough word. The only word that really gets close to it is divinity. It's so fucking astonishing. Nobody would believe it if they saw it. Or they'd have a religious conversion and become really annoying and make YouTube videos. I guess that's what would happen. Anyway, I think I'm done. I had a good chat. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Nathan, for inspiring me with that work, which was called Lord Krishna's Description of Mystic Yoga Perfections from the Bhagavata Purana, chapter 15. The chapter describes 8 primary and 10 mystical perfections developed by fixing one's mind in yoga. But they are ultimately obstructions to achieving the spiritual abode of Lord Vishnu. Right? They're obstructions. This is exactly what this thing is saying. We're so blessed. It's unbelievable. We're so blessed and nobody can see it. And the funny thing is that that God, this emanation, is penetrating through every molecule. It creates everything. But we're so focused on the projection that we don't see the emanation. It's hilarious, really. Yeah, I'm out of here, you guys. Have a great week.